Welcome to tonight's Artist and Artist Lecture. I'm Kelly Kivlin. I'm an associate curator here. And it's a great pleasure to welcome Silke Otto-Knapp, who will be speaking on Joan Jonas. This is our second of the season. We have two more, so if you're interested, you can always take a look at our website for the remaining ones. I also want to thank the Department of Cultural Affairs for their generous support of this series, as well as Brooklyn Brewery for the beer. And I'm just going to say a few words about one of the pieces that Silke is going to be using as, I think, a point of departure for her talk. It's a piece by Jonas called The Shape, the Scent, the Feel of Things. And for those that don't know, it originally was installed or was presented as an installation, the Renaissance Society in 2004. And it was also presented alongside the work Lines in the Sand, which I believe is considered a sort of sequel to the work. Shortly after, Dia's then curator Lynn Cook commissioned Jonas to realize The Shape, the Scent, the Feel of Things as a site-specific performance at Dia Beacon. And that was presented in two different years, October of 2005 and October of 2006. Incorporating movement, music by Jason Moran, and projected pre-edited footage and live footage, The Shape, the Scent, the Feel of Things is in part a response to the writings of German art historian Abby Warburg during his visit to the American Southwest in 1896. Silke Otto-Knapp was born in Germany in 1970 and currently lives and works in Los Angeles. She received a Master of Fine Arts from Chelsea College of Art and Design, London, and a degree in Cultural Studies from the University of Hildesheim, Germany. She has had recent one-person exhibitions at the Art Gallery of Ontario in 2015, the Camden Art Centre, London, 2014, Kunsthalle Charlottenburg in 2013, and the Berkeley Art Museum Pacific Film Archive in 2012. She has participated in numerous group exhibitions, and a few just recent ones are the Drawing Biennial in 2014 in the Kunsthalle Oslo, and Dance Draw at the ICA Boston in 2011, which was a fantastic show. So thank you again for joining us this evening, and please join me in welcoming Silke Otto-Knapp.
Hi. I actually thought I would start by I'm not just going to. This is like an introduction before the introduction. I'm not just taking this, the shape, the scent, the feel of things as a starting point. That is really the focus of what I want to be talking about. And so I thought I would start. I didn't know Joan was going to be here in person, but I thought I would start with, with her voice. And as I'm sure, same as me, many of you may have seen the installation of this or footage of it, but not actually seen the performance live. I thought it would be nice with a kind of to get a feel for what it looked like. So I'm going to start that, and then I'm going to do my actual introduction. So it's like let me just go a little bit faster, maybe.
As psychohistorian, I tried to diagnose schizophrenia of Western civilization from its images in an autobiographical reflex. The shape, the sense, the feel of things. The actuality of the present, its bearing on the past, their bearing on the future. Past, present, future. These three, fourth dimensional. The room has four sides. There are 4 seasons to a year. It is as simple and as inevitable in the building of time as the 4 walls to a room.
Okay. So what you just heard really is is the very beginning of the performance that was, like Kelly already said, it's around 80 minutes long, and it was performed in October 2005, I think, at Deer Beacon. And I think it ran for a whole month or something like that, and then again in October 2006. So thank you for inviting me to speak today, and thank you very much for coming. And it's been a great opportunity for me to think about the works in the Dia collection that I'm sure as many of you also have gotten to know in many visits over the years. And it's been a bit of a narrative, a journey of its own to arrive at what to choose, what to talk about. When I was on my way to New York in June this year, when Kelly Kivland, who you just heard speak, emailed me to ask me if I wanted to participate in this lecture series. And as I was just arriving, we planned to take the opportunity and go out to Deer Beacon together and see the part of the collection that was currently on view and see if there was, something. I had some ideas, obviously, but if there was something that would kind of come to mind. And the trip there was beautiful, as it always is. So I arrived at Grand Central Station early in the morning. And as you can see here behind me, I was amazed. I don't come to New York that often, but I come regularly, and I had never actually seen the ceiling in Grand Central Station before. So I mustn't not have taken the train for a while. So I was really amazed by this ceiling that I'm sure you all know well, but I think it's good to revisit that from time to time. It was created in 1912, and it shows the signs of the zodiac, and the signs, everything's outlined in gold leaf and modeled with small gold leaf stars. So there's about 2,500 stars, but to amplify the perspective, there is also small light bulbs kind of inserted into the ceiling in order to give give a sense of the kind of night sky as a space. So the spectacle is really quite amazing. So I'm mentioning this, it's not a random kind of travelogue. I'm mentioning this in so much detail because in retrospect it seemed a really fitting start to a journey that led me to reread and think about the work of, via the work of Joan Jonas, the German art historian Abi Warburg, who, as Kelly said, is the protagonist of Jonas's work that I would like to talk about tonight. So in his studies of Renaissance painting, Warburg was immersed in the Florentine libraries and their documents, and very soon trained as a kind of traditional art historian of the time, early 19th century, 20th century. He began to discover that many of the paintings that he loved that was actually deeply rooted in much more ancient practices, particularly those of astrology and other kinds of kind of semi-magical make-believes and religious doctrines. Some of them very esoteric and never really mentioned in the, in the art historical perspective of, of his time. But I will, I leave it at that for now and come back to Warburg in a little while. But at the moment, I'm still at Grand Central Station looking at the ceiling, and it really seems to come from a different universe than the modern railway that it houses, and that is so central in the, in the narrative of the colonization of the American West. Warburg in 1896 traveled from New York to Arizona via Boston and Chicago in order to visit the Pueblo Indian villages. But I'm in June this year still on my way to Beacon, so here we are. So on the train, I was talking to Kelly, and I was thinking about I still haven't decided who to speak about, but I'm thinking back on the many visits to the Dia space here in Chelsea when I first started coming to New York in the early 90s, and then later in the new spaces in Beacon. I had already decided that I was for sure going to speak about one of the few women artists in the collection, both to point out how few they are, and also as a kind of interest that I have in my own paintings in thinking about or connecting with the work and life of women artists, often historical in the form of portraits, what I call portraits, and referring to the spaces that they occupied or the work that they made. So I was thinking Agnes Martin or Hanne Darboven, thinking about the collection. Here we've arrived now. So I was walking through the galleries and looking at as you all know, the beautiful displays paying tribute to Dia's collecting legacy. And we had already kind of arrived back at the bookstore when Kelly asked if I was interested in seeing the basement space, where sometimes special commissions happen. Here we are. So we go down there, and it was completely empty with a sign, no visitors beyond this point. And it really felt to me at the time like a little bit like the underworld to the kind of church-like atmosphere upstairs at Dia Beacon. And it was really interesting to think about how an institution that began so radically by finding ways to show and preserve the site-specific work that was being made in the 60s and 70s now seems to define our ideal of what a museum presentation actually looks like. So I had been very interested in the live programs at Dia Beacon also, and followed the retrospectives done with people like Trisha Brown and Yvonne Rainer, which were always placed in the, also work that was made in the 60s, usually in the context of the Dia legacy, and usually those performances would take place in the actual space of the collections. Like this is early work by Trisha Brown. I think that happened a couple of years ago. And eventually, Kelly started describing to me the commission by Joan Jonas for the basement space. I was already intrigued by the title, the shape, the scent, the feel of things that seemed to somehow fall outside of the established legacy and approach that had been taken to the space. So it's the theatricality and the narrative structure of Jonas' performances that somehow seemed out of sync with the minimal atmosphere at Dia Beacon. That might seem a little obvious, but somehow in terms of the decision-making process, I was really interested in thinking about something that was time-based, but that was that didn't really seem part of the kind of classic inventory of the Dia, and somehow kind of pointed to maybe how it might think about its future approach to collecting or kind of developing the legacy that it has. So on top of that, I had seen, this is an installation view of Lines in the Sand from the Renaissance Society. And I had actually seen a performance of that at Tate Modern in London in 2004, and I had also seen the installation at Documenta 11. It had made particularly the performance made a very big impression on me. You can see the kind of stage set as it appeared here, but if you imagine that, I mean, the Renaissance Society is a big space, but in the kind of cavernous space of Tate Modern, it was really a very kind of special experience. And unlike really anything I had ever witnessed in an art context, I felt. So Lines in the Sand is, as Kelly said, the kind of sister work, sequel work to The Shape, the Scent, the Feel of Things, and it's based on an epic poem called Helen in Egypt by the Imagist poet Hilda Doolittle, H.D. And H.D. also provides the title for The Shape, the Scent, the Feel of Things, and the preface that you just heard in the clip, Joan speaking in the clip that I just showed. So she kind of is an important kind of source, point of reference, kind of frame for for thinking about this this work. So in H.D.'s version, the myth of Helen of Troy is kind of shifted its perspective. It was assumed that Helen was the reason for the Trojan War and been abducted by the Trojan king, prince or whatever. And but then there is other, that's Homer's version, I think. But then there's other narratives that say that she was actually absent and she was in Egypt during this time. So suddenly, this war story is sort of replaced with an absence, which is kind of an interesting starting point. So Hilda Doolittle had also undergone psychoanalysis with Freud in the 30s, I think, quite extensively, and published an account of that in her notes on Freud at around the same time as Helen of Egypt. And both Freud and H.D. understood myth as related to the unconscious, and I'm assuming it makes a lot of sense to think of it in relationship to Joan Jonas's work as well. So just a few, I don't know how well you know about H.D. She was born in 1886 and was a part of the self-proclaimed Imagist movements. And I think it's really interesting they actually, as in summer 1912, they kind of formulated something like a small, what do you call it, a declaration, a manifesto that says direct treatment of the thing, whether subjective or objective. Second, to use absolutely no word that does not contribute to the presentation. Third, as regarding rhythm, to compose in sequence of the musical phrase, not in sequence of the metronome. So I did try, of course, and compose my lecture according to those principles, but I'm going to read you a poem instead to see, to illustrate. It goes like this. Whirl up, sea, whirl your pointed pines, splash your great pines on our rocks. Hurl your green over us, cover us with your pools of fur. That leads me to a quote by Joan describing Lines in the Sand, where she says, "I'm reenacting a grandiose historical event through several texts of different cultures and eras, including my own personal quotidian objects, my body as a performer, and Las Vegas as a site of current cultural symbolism. My translation of H.D.'s translation creates yet another text, a contemporary one in which our current cultural symbols and conflicts and issues of contemporary artistic practice are recognized." And I think that's, I won't be quoting you all the time, but I think that is really an important perspective on, how these kind of complex works are approach their source material in a way, and the narratives that they're working with. Here's some more installation shots of Lines in the Sand. So I have been interested in the. I said the performance at Tate Modern did seem very. I must admit I did kind of. I've been very interested in the history of dance and also stage design, especially modern and contemporary dance, and have made paintings in relationship to that, but I've always kind of felt alienated by the experience of kind of narrative theater in many ways, because it seemed like that this kind of, that the suspension of disbelief that was necessary, it felt strange to be witnessing somebody performing in such a clearly artificial setup and not acknowledging that at all in the way that the performance was constructed. So I found that a difficult thing to negotiate as a viewer. So now, the lines in the sand and also the shape, the scent, the feel of things definitely work with theatrical conventions and narrative forms, but they don't, I don't think they could be described as theater, but somehow, this kind of self-referential level or this kind of self-reflexive mode was was existing alongside this kind of, the use of theatrical conventions and narrative. And I found that a really interesting combination. So back to the history of dance. So I've made paintings involving stage sets and choreographed movement, comparing when I think of the space of a stage to the pictorial space of a painting. And so staging as a frame that allows for an image to exist and to be perceived by a viewer has been a kind of important device for me in how I approach painting. So I did, in 2006, made a painting of one of Joan's early mirror pieces. Here it is. It's 1 meter by 1 meter. It's called Figures and Mirrors. It's using silver watercolor. So it has a reflective surface that kind of interferes with the illusionistic space that's set up by the motif. There is a kind of sense of perspective and depth articulated in the image, but that's always kind of interrupted through the monochrome silver and the reflective quality, where where you're being thrown back onto the flatness of the picture plane. So you get this kind of ambiguous space that remains sort of unstable. I'm just going to, this is an image of Mirror Piece. I think it's from 1969. I think it's from Mirror Piece 2, but I'll just go to the description of Mirror Piece 1. It's about 15 women in short dresses hold standard full-length mirrors. In a reference to Busby Berkeley production numbers, the women slowly move in choreographed patterns, always facing the spectators in order to capture and reveal their reflections. 2 men dressed in suits walk continuously among the women, interrupting their slow moves and periodically lifting, carrying, and depositing them at randomly chosen spaces. So going back to the context of the Dia collection, it was interesting to consider Joan Jonas's work in connection to early conceptual art and the legacy of the Judson Dance Theater and the happenings of the 60s. Obviously, she, that has been well documented and written about, that she was grew up around this work, saw a lot of it, and was involved in dialogues around it. But I always kind of felt like that there was somehow a different approach and a perspective to it already in the early work. Both of the mirror pieces were made in 1969, and they are very formal and choreographed presentation that are very kind of related to thinking about presentations of dance in a way, but they kind of address issues of feminist issues of the objectification of women, very directly, and are implicating the audience in the action in the way that they appear in mirrors, also preempting something like Dan Graham's performer audience mirror from 1975. So Mirror Piece 2, which is this one here, combines the action with a recorded audio of Jonas reading David Antin's poem A List of the Delusions of the Insane That They Are Afraid Of from 1968, and sort of establishes this other narrative element that seems really quite different from the kind of political engagement with everyday life that I associate with like a Judson church approach to performance, for instance. I just like that image. I decided not to talk about that because it's getting too long. So it's then this is another thing that kind of marks the early work out, I think, is that there is this kind of strong relationship to the natural world, already in very early works. There's obviously also a lot of works in New York in an urban context, but I think the works done on beaches or in nature are really quite different from, maybe there is a relationship to Smithson, but very different from the land art of Walter de Maria or Michael Heitzer or something like that. So she's investigating the role of a landscape as a space for a performance, and even later on the possibilities of an animal being in the role of a performer. So this one's called Nova Scotia Beach Dance from 1971, and the spectators stand on the cliff and overlooking this stage, this triangular stage that's formed from via the perspective of the audience. It's in a way quite similar to the Dia Beacon space, where the audience is on one side of the space, and I would say the space is very much a protagonist in the in the performance as much as any of the actors or props, by making use of that kind of extreme perspective defined by the many pillars. So here it's this kind of triangular piece of the beach that's visible that becomes the stage. Then there is a variety of props and things like that were, I think, found in that environment, or in that kind of natural environment, and the performers' movements are choreographed in relation to the stone circle, the wooden post, and the triangular stage. So the stage kind of becomes an active participant in a way in determining the choreography. And there is ritualistic activities with stone, sand, and water, and other movements derived specifically from the physical situation of the performance space. And I think this kind of engagement with existing, nature has such a I think the engagement with like everyday movement of somebody like Yvonne Rainer is really, is somehow, a different approach to ritual than activities that are determined by. These are very kind of formal decisions that are being made, but somehow allowing for a kind of natural environment like this to become part of the viewing experience is shifting things into another kind of narrative space, I would say. Then this is called Wind, and it's one of the first outdoor pieces, but it's choreographed specifically for film. And again, there is kind of enigmatic movements. People crouch and huddle together and perform what looks like kind of ritualistic movements, and there is already the kind of idea of a doubling introduced that I want to come back to in more detail. Is that a bell that says? I'm thinking. Yes, Wind. Here you can see. If you go back to the beach piece, you can see the kind of the way that. The space is activated, and here it's not only it's a doubling of the space by having a projection of itself, like a kind of cabinet of mirrors that makes the perspective endless, as that's used at, I think, only at the end of the of the actual performance. I would. Now I want to come eventually to the actual, to the shape, the scent, the feel of things. But I'd like to preface that with maybe some aspects, that came up for me when I started looking at it in a lot of detail. And as I said before, I didn't see it performed. I have had a video of it for a while now, and I was just saying to Joan, I've been to Captiva Island to the Rauschenberg's studio, where they now have a residency program for the last 5 weeks. So I'm covered in bug bites, but I also had a lot of time to work and to think. You're very well. It's a small kind of section of the island that he lived and worked in, and you basically don't have to leave that other than for walks on the beach. And so I had a lot of time to look at this material, and I got kind of distracted in all kinds of directions all over the place. Like I ended up with watching a whole conference on Abi Warburg and Walter Benjamin on podcasts, and while I was making prints, and it was very difficult to kind of rein back in what I could actually say in an hour here. So what I was kind of thinking about is first of all, this kind of idea of theatricality that's in the performance, and that, as I was already saying, the use of theatrical devices, and how watching Lines in the Sand at Tate Modern sort of changed my preconceptions and understanding of how that could, how that could operate, and then also Joan Jonas's approach to sources and materials from literature, mythology, poetry, and cultural history, and her way of activating these sources, which I think has been described somewhere as a kind of working through them. It's never an illustrating or interpreting them, but it's like it's a kind of an understanding or working through them by translating them into her language in a way, or the way that she works in different, the way that she uses media. And so this interest in how images operate and affect us seems really important in her very multi-layered approach to addressing this. She's using film, video, sound, movement, language, and space, and all of this comes together in a complex narrative. But it never feels like a multimedia spectacle, but as a very precise placement and choreography of the material. I'm coming back to landscape, digressing. So that's something that, in terms of prefacing what I bring to kind of watching this performance, this is a landscape in Newfoundland, and I've been thinking a lot and been very interested in the landscape of, you've seen the Nova Scotia beach piece in. And I've known that Joan spends her summers in Cape Breton in Nova Scotia, and that she kind of moves between traveling and then obviously living in New York City, and the summers in this kind of natural environment. I've recently started going to an island in Newfoundland, off the coast of Newfoundland, called Fogo Island, which is this is an image of it right here. And I've recently bought my own house there. To make sure that this is a place that I can, live and work for years to come. It feels like a kind of a very big decision to be making. And I've also recently moved from Europe to Los Angeles. So the question of how place, both geographically and culturally might influence one's work is very present in my life. And in thinking about Joan's work, I've she talks about being early travels to Japan that have been very influential, seeing No, Buto, and Bunraki performances. Then in the performance here at Beacon, she refers back to a visit to the Hopi Indians in Arizona, and then more recently she's been interested in the Nordic tales via visits to Iceland, Ireland, and Norway. So this is, sorry, I like that image. This is, I'm assuming, at your house in Nova Scotia. And so then there's this bench that appears, that's used both in Lines in the Sand, I don't remember, as from the installation shot, and also in the shape, the scent, the feel of things, which is a bench that's found in along the coast of for sure the Canadian Maritimes. I'm sure it goes much further than this, This one is one on Fogo Island in Newfoundland, and there, what I know of it is that it's designed for fishermen who come in for their morning break to have a rest in the kitchen. Traditionally, I mean, they're now, the kitchen would have been the one place in the house that was heated, and as they were going back to work afterwards, this was a kind of wooden bench that you couldn't get too comfortable on, but you could stretch out. And I find it, and it's very interesting, this is the version of the bench in the performance that suddenly gets transformed into a cross between a analyst's couch and a hospital bed. But it also still has this, but I think it's really interesting that it has, that's located in something that, Joan Jonas probably has in her house that has this kind of other, this other kind of tradition and history to it. So here is Jose Luis lying on as Abi Warburg, lying on the couch / hospital bed, and I'd like to show another quick excerpt.
I have the sensation of being a seismograph, assembled from the wooden pieces of a plant that has been transplanted from the east into the fertile northern German plains, and of which an Italian branch was grafted. I let the signs that I received come out of me, because in this epoch of chaotic decline, even the weakest has the duty to strengthen the will to cosmic order.
I don't know if you could understand everything, but Warburg talks about himself as a seismograph, as an instrument that is able to detect earthquakes, so it can detect and record motion. And I think that's a really interesting way of thinking about oneself and one's work, or maybe an approach to making work, or from the perspective of an art historian doing research. So again, Joan Jonas says about developing a performance that she's more interested in investigating the material rather than inhabiting it. I've already said that, I think, but I think it's important to repeat, as it seems a very important attitude to the sources that she's working with, to kind of investigate what her interest is in them, and what they can mean in the context of her work, rather than just referring to them interpreting them immediately. So the actions, images, and sounds don't illustrate a narrative, but instead use it as a structure that can be inhabited. Like Warburg, the seismograph, I think she thinks laterally and places images side by side. So I would like to follow this method and look at the performance from this perspective. I already mentioned the idea of the double, that is present in the way that mirrors are such an important kind of physical prop, but also metaphor in the early performances, and that's something that kind of runs through all of the work. But in this particular performance, I think that it's actually Abi Warburg as the protagonist that operates in a way as the double for the artist in the conception and realization of the work. On a kind of autobiographical kind of level, they both travel to Arizona in order to witness a traditional snake dance performed by the Hopi Indians. and a shared fascination for the function of ritual in different cultures. They did this at very different points in time, the end of the 19th century for Warburg and I think the 1970s for Jonas, but they both felt uneasy about the position of an outside spectator to witness this traditional ritualistic dance. And by extension, they felt unsure as to how and if to use this in their work. But it remains a kind of formative experience or a strong experience. So both did not want to talk about not wanting to objectify what they witnessed in the manner of a kind of an ethnographer who has a kind of distance perspective, a kind of superior scientific perspective, but they were also aware of the danger in romanticizing an experience like that into an easy polarity of pagan culture versus rational modernity, as Warburg phrases it. So both of them let about 20 years pass until they come back to this material and the memory of it and kind of think about it in their work. So here we have Warburg kind of in the first scene of the performance. He's reclining on his hospital bed, analyst's couch, and attended to by two nurses. So he wrote in 1923. He wrote a lecture called "Images from the Region of the Pueblo Indians of North America," while in treatment at a psychiatric clinic in Switzerland, following a nervous breakdown and diagnosis of schizophrenia. So the lecture was supposed to convince his physician, a doctor called Binswanger, that he could be considered cured. Very different times in terms of psychoanalytic treatment or treatment of schizophrenia. So, but in 1896, Warburg had traveled to the U.S. for his brother's wedding in New York, and appalled by the kind of experience of industrial kind of city life on the East Coast, he decided to travel to the Southwest in search of to visit the Pueblo villages in Arizona and New Mexico that he had seen in photographs. So after visiting some of the villages and attending some of the ritual dances and rituals and documenting them in photographs, he travels to California for the winter in order to kind of return specifically to see this snake dance that he's heard about. And he's been interested in the serpent as a symbol that appears in the iconography of different European cultures since antiquity, and hopes to be able to kind of make a connection between these very different cultural contexts in witnessing this dance. But I think unlike Joan Jonas, he never actually saw it performed. So here he is, reading, of course, Abi Warburg. And I'll give you a little bit of information on him. He was born into a German Jewish banking dynasty, born in 1866. He grew up in Hamburg. And there is a kind of very, famous anecdote that at age 13 already he made a business deal with his brother to offering to give up his birthright of inheriting the family business as the firstborn in exchange for a lifetime supply of books. I mean, that's if it's true, that's a kind of an amazing anecdote. So the brother agrees, and that many years later leads to establishing the Warburg Library, which still exists in London now. So he studied art history in Germany and then moved to Florence. And as an art historian, he very quickly became dissatisfied with the kind of conventional approach to art history of the time, which he found formal and aestheticizing. And he sort of started to look at things from a more philosophical and interdisciplinary perspective. So while studying Renaissance Florence, he became interested in the influence of antiquity on modern culture, and particularly interested he found that the symbolism of recurring motifs across different cultures could be observed from a kind of anthropological and psychological perspective. And so he developed a completely new, unorthodox approach to, looking at cultural artifacts, artworks, and these research methods really have led to what we now think of as cultural studies, so they're still incredibly influential. So in 1900, he established the Warburg Library, which became a very large, privately owned library built around his approach to sort of making lateral connections. It moved from Hamburg to London in 1933 and is now part of the School of Advanced Study at the University of London. So it still maintains more than 350,000 volumes, and they're kept on open shelves and are accessible to all. Now, what's particular about the library is their system of organizing the books. It's not a kind of an alphabetical or linear kind of chronological system like you would find in a normal library, but it's arranged by subject and according to Warburg's division of into categories of action, orientation, word, image. So very kind of abstract, wide-ranging categories. They run by what they call the law of the good neighbor. So it's not an alphabetical catalog, but it's cataloged around themes. And the methodology is the methodology of serendipity as an intellectual model. And it could be said that serendipity is responsible for most for most great ideas and for a kind of a very kind of particular fertile cultural climate. And that brings me directly back to what I think about Joan Jonas's lateral thinking in approaching a subject matter. So for the score in the book that the Dia published, she distinguishes between text, action, video, and light and sound in order to indicate the different layers and areas of activity that happen oftentimes simultaneously. So that, again, thinking about the double seems a kind of striking resemblance to Warburg's methodology in research. Sorry. And establishing a synchronicity between seemingly unrelated motifs and areas of study. So, I had some pictures of that. Here is the library. The reading room. Back to this. So when Jonas travels back to revisit the Indian, the Hopi villages to 20 years or whatever after she first witnessed the snake dance, it was either before or at the same time that she had read the translation of Warburg's essay and the kind of accompanying the accompanying essay that that kind of contextualizes it, and it's the specific situation of him giving the lecture while while hospitalized for schizophrenia. So suddenly this kind of enables her to approach, to use it as a frame to approach questions in her own work about her interest in ritual in other cultures much more directly. I want to say a few things about, I've already mentioned earlier the way that the space becomes a protagonist in the work. Here we're back in the kind of underworld of Dia Beacon with José Luis Blondet, as Warburg standing at the front of the space of the space, and the space is really divided into I've already talked about the kind of extreme perspective that the performance is working with, and it could almost be described as the front being the kind of realistic, an actual space. So to say, where the actual, where Warburg is in his hospital room, and where the kind of narrative that structures everything unfolds, And then the back of the space is more of a space for movement and projected images and light that could be more described as a space of illusion that's inhabited by memories, visions, magical occurrences, and dances. But these two obviously kind of intersect and interlink with video footage that's filmed in Nova Scotia, Arizona, California, and Nevada. And there seems to be a kind of transitional space in the middle that's kind of indicated by a movable projection screen that comes in and out, kind of splicing the space in half. But then it's also, that transitionary middle ground is also occupied by the activity of drawing that kind of reoccurs throughout the performance and the musical score. I mean, you've heard some of that already in the clips that I've shown, but the music is really a very... I almost want to say dominant force. It's like a dramatic driving force that provides transitions between scenes and that kind of underlines supports the narrative as it unfolds. Here is a rehearsal. A bit of rehearsal footage. I actually talked to Jose Luis Blondet on the phone a couple days ago. He lives in Los Angeles, about his experience of this, and he talks about it as it being one of the gifts that life has given him to be to have participated in this, and hopefully it will be performed again. And he was talking about the kind of improvisation that would go on in the rehearsals, but as they continued, there was obviously a very set text and a set of choreography and movements of where he would have to be when and what he would have to be doing there throughout these 80 minutes. But there was still always kind of what he described as room for improvisation on his part or on the part of the other actors on stage. And he described it as a kind of like an extreme state of alert that sort of kept him in this kind of in this kind of tension of really wanting to, not inhabiting the character, not acting, but somehow communicating the words to the audience in this kind of with a kind of extreme focus and projection. So it was, as he said that intensity was directed at really communicating to the audience. That kind of, didn't leave him throughout the many repetitions that he experienced of this. One more clip. See this.
Map. Desert steppe. Cliff dwellings. Laguna. Girl with jug. Pottery. Wash basin. Arriving. Kachina. Painted image of serpent.
can kind of see the position that he's taking in relationship to the, to the video projection. I'll come back to that figure of Melancholia in a minute, but just want, this is obviously a voice, Jonas's voice from the off, and that's a kind of an important recounting a list of what I think of as, as images, not even describing them, but just listing them as words. So, they bring up a kind of an image in front of the viewer's eye, but they also exist, but they also kind of just exist as, as sounds, not even in, not even in need for illustration or in interpretation. And the same kind of goes for for a lot of the text. All of it is it's a kind of a collage of existing texts from mostly essays and lectures. So these texts are not really meant to be performed or acted, but they're meant to be read. And so it's interesting how how the actors or the performers approach them as a kind of readings and recitals without really inhabiting the characters. But there is still this, what I described as this kind of urgency in communication. That's kind of not in an expressive way, but in a kind of wanting to bring across the information and conjure up the images kind of way. So here again, keep that in mind. And here is the Dürer etching of Melancholia 1 from 1514. And now Warburg identifies with the medieval figure of Melancholia throughout his working life, really comes back to this as a kind of symbolic image in that he relates to to his work and his relationship to his work throughout his life. So it's in art historically, it's usually identified as a spiritual self-portrait of Dürer, as Melancholia is traditionally a depiction of the intellectual kind of situation of the artist. So in Warburg, identifying with the pose of Melancholia, Jonas places him in the role of the artist, and again, in the situation of her own double in a way. So in medieval philosophy, each individual was thought to be dominated by one of the four temperaments, and melancholy was definitely the least desirable one of the four, and melancholics were most likely thought to succumb to insanity. But in Renaissance, this changed a little bit. In Renaissance thought, where it was suddenly linked with creative genius. So here we have the winged personification of melancholy. She's sitting there dejectedly with her hand resting on her head, resting on her hand, and she holds a califer and is also surrounded by other tools of geometry. And that was, and they were supposed to be geometry was one of the 7 liberal arts that underlies artistic creation. And it's specifically the one that Dürer thought would help him to approach perfection. It seems like he's already achieved it, but I guess that is what was driving him. So creativity in the arts was in the realm of the imagination and was actually considered the first and lowest in a hierarchy of 3 categories of genius. The next ones would have been, so there's imagination, then there's reason, then there's spirit. And it seems ironic that an artist such as Dürer, at the height of his powers, would identify with an image of a paralyzed and powerless artist that kind of is can never really achieve its full full potential. So the position of the doubtful thinking artist is repeated in the, we have it here, it's both Warburg inhabits it, but then it's also repeated in the female character, in the video that accompanies this scene. And she's traveling across landscapes and seasons and is accompanied by a dog, geometrical tools, a magic box, all of the elements that are in Dürer's Melancholia too. And again, I think it's a reflection on Jonas's own working methods and when she inhabits Warburg's role and identification with Dürer's figure of Melancholia. At this stage, she begins to arrange drawings on a large board in the kind of middle section of the space, and that really, I'd like to stay with relationship to images. So there is like drawn images and versus like inhabited poses that that appear throughout the performance. So earlier in the performance, Jonas has already been, or her character has already been making drawings of snakes and moths that in a kind of in a kind of not looking at the drawing while she's making it way, but the audience being able to kind of see the drawing being made in this kind of automatic way. So she arranges them on a panel, and again, this directly relates to one of Warburg's last and finished projects, the Menace Atlas, which he started in 1924 and was still working on by the time he died in 1925, and it was really his map to how images that he perceived as like symbolic, that have great symbolic, intellectual, and emotional power, emerge in Western antiquity and then reappear and are animated in the art and cosmology of later times and places. And that goes from like Greece to, from ancient Greece to the Weimar Germany that he finds, that he's living in. So he's focusing especially on the Renaissance, but as the historical period where he found the struggle between the forces of reason and unreason to be the most visible. And he hoped that the Atlas, Menace Atlas, as he called it, would allow viewers to experience these polarities that, in his mind, determine culture and thought. And he thought they would do that a lot better than, a written account of his research, of his kind of into the kind of iconography of into the mythology of images in a way. So he combines the atlas with his own intuitive logic and years of rigorous scholarship. So this isn't just this goes with this, but it's really there is he's working on this in a kind of constant revising and editing process that with a view to kind of understanding something about different cultures at different points in time might relate to one another. I mean, there are kind of very strong relationships to what comes up in a Google search, and there certainly has been they have Warburg's Menace Atlas has been discussed in great detail by contemporary art historians and thinkers such as George D.D. Huberman, who curated an exhibition based around the this kind of lateral way of making connections and relationships between propelled by images that don't share the same context, but placed in next to each other suddenly produce produce meaning. So this is a version of a contemporary version done by George D.D. Huberman that's relating directly to panel number 24 of the Menace Atlas, and then he kind of expanded that. There is a book and an exhibition that was based on this principle. It also kind of brings to mind a kind of important work I don't know if it's in the DIA collection, but it was definitely shown at DIA. I saw it here. It's Hanne Darboven's Kulturgeschichte, 1980 to 1983, cultural history, 1980 to 1983, and I'm sure she made it with very strongly with Warburg's Atlas in mind. I'm not paying attention to the time. I can't see the time, but I will try and kind of. Okay, that's good. So I'll try and kind of take you through the. I was saying this to Joan. There is a kind of watching the performance unfold on on video or experience it live, similar, I think, in a way to what the Warburg actor kind of describes as a kind of heightened state of alertness. I think it's a very similar thing for a viewer, because there is things going on in parallel simultaneously that you want to be paying attention to, that all kind of relate to one another, that constantly keep you feeling you're getting it, and then it's kind of transforming already again or it's like slipping away from you. So kind of writing the talk or thinking about how to approach it was a very similar experience. I kind of wanted to go into all of these, all of these details and connections and the experience of how it is translated into Jonas's work. But I kept kind of finding myself kind of losing track of one strand and then kind of picking up again on another. So I hope that in the spirit of kind of Warburg, that this will it will produce a kind of something approaching a whole by the time I get to the the end of it. So. Back to the performance, here still the Menace panels appear at a different stage of the performance, and they're in this kind of what I described as this kind of transitionary kind of middle ground, kind of dreamlike space, where he is still in his hospital gown, but he's kind of working on the combining the images and kind of maybe writing his lecture and kind of thinking through his research visually. So this kind of use of the camera as a kind of hall of mirrors that extends the action into a kind of an endless space. It sort of mirrors the kind of working principle of the both the atlas and the library as something that can be that doesn't stop, that as time goes on needs to be assessed and reassessed and reconsidered and challenged by its own principles as it develops in order to stay relevant. So the Warburg Library, as it exists now, there was just recently, I mean, it's threatened not with closure, but with kind of being integrated into the kind of larger organization of the University of London, which would mean losing its very special, lateral kind of, thematic organization of works, and which is of course a kind of a financial matter, and would be much easier to look after the books if it could be alphabetized like the rest of their holdings. But there's really very strong opposition to this from like a kind of intellectual community, and they're the people that the art historians and librarians that work there. They still organize new material in according to the same principles. So it's an ongoing kind of intellectual process and pursuit. Here he is working on it, and that brings me to the next kind of, again, we've seen her before, the kind of the figure of the young woman who could be described in Warburg's iconography of imagination as the figure of a nymph, that kind of that he's made used as an area of research throughout, her appearance throughout art history, and at very different times. So she's always in his, the way she appears in paintings and images. She's a young woman in flowing drapery who gives the illusion of rapid and graceful movement, and can be found dancing through Western art history for 2,000 years. So these repeated poses are parts, he understands them as parts of an ongoing inheritance, a natural language of visual meaning that we all understand without necessarily having been consciously instructed in it. So Jonas uses the figure of the nymph, the young woman, as a trope that, a character that appears throughout the performance in different roles. She appears in person or masked as here she's wearing a moth costume, and she later on will perform a kind of section of the snake dance, and she inhabits the pose of of Melancholia. So as a mythical figure, she can cross space and time and act as a double for Jonas, the artist. I think the relationship, the use of mask is something that's also of constant interest, and the figure of organic honey that was developed in the 70s could be kind of, if Warburg was studying the nymph now, would probably occur in his kind of atlas of images documenting this. Then in another kind of art historical motif that occurs slightly later is a headdress. We're now moving towards the actual snake ritual that's based on the Laocoon sculpture. And it's a kind of counterpart to the figure of Melancholia. The kind of Laocoon fighting the snakes is the kind of prototypical icon of human agony in Western art. And unlike agony depicted in Christian art, in the Passion of Jesus and the Martyrs, his suffering has no redemptive power or reward. So it's really quite a different position than the figure of the kind of melancholy artist, which has a lot of kind of potential for creation in it still. So in his essay on the that's at the kind of base of this of the performance, on the visiting the Pueblo Indians, Warburg makes the connection of the appearance of a snake in the in the cultic habits of ancient Greece, for instance. So the serpent is a symbol that occurs across very different cultures, from antiquity to Christianity. You can kind of trace the nature or the changing nature of faith from fetishism to the kind of Christian pure religion of redemption. And the snake is always there as symbolizing everything from immortality to sin. So here is she's activating the Laocoon snake hat. That then leads us to again the kind of middle section of the space, where she starts to make large drawings on the ground using a brush or on a long wooden stick, and the circular movements that put her that she uses in order to kind of make snake-like what looks like snake-like drawings create a kind of a dance, a kind of I guess a version of the of the snake dance that she witnessed. The video in the background shows lines drawn into the sand, and this kind of use of automatic and repeated drawing over and over the same motif, like the dog's head, or here the snake or the moth, could be takes on in the performance the kind of experience of a ritual. So the drawings really can be compared to the way Warburg to Warburg's writing of the lecture in the context of being institutionalized at the time. So it's a kind of ritual that he performs in order to kind of change his situation. Again, there is this kind of doubling of the artist and the art historian. So his question is in addressing the function of magic in the modern world, and he describes the drawings of animals that he's seen on the earthenware pots of the Hopi Indians as hieroglyphs, where he kind of directly associates the act of drawing with the act of writing, as in seeing and thinking in images leading to a form of symbolic pictographic writing. So again, the artist Jonas and Warburg look at each other in the mirror again, in the way that this kind of, this kind of the drawing ritual unfolds. Then I want to kind of quickly come to the actual snake ritual. I don't know exactly what the provenance of these images is. I don't know if this is, if I'm assuming that this is what it looks like. I don't think you can. It's still possible to witness this. I think those, like the access of visitors and tourists has kind of been severely restricted since I guess you, Joan, went to visit it. But the basis is that the Hopi culture worships the snake and thinks of it as representing lightning. The coiled version of the snake is a symbol for the rhythm of time. So in late summer, when the land is particularly dry and the crops in need of water, the snakes are caught by members of the community, especially kind of selected priests that are able to do so, and initially washed. Then in the second part of the ceremony, those snakes are kind of thrown onto drawings that were made in a field of sand. If you're kind of thinking back to this, you can see the connection. And those drawings are erased by the kind of movement of the snakes trying to escape. Then so the image is obliterated in the process. The snakes are then carried in the mouths of the dancers and eventually set free as messengers to kind of ask for the necessary August storms to come in order to provide a good harvest. The Hopi Indians are traditionally hunters and farmers, so that means that their masked dances are a magical practice that actually has a function in aiding their provision of food. So the dance is necessary in their fight for existence. This is very important for Warburg in particular, that it doesn't have a decorative function, but it's both evoking magic, but with a kind of with a view to how to feed the family in the next over the winter. So I think this, this kind of polarity between, between function and, and magical ritual is very important to him. So here is another image of the snake dance. So then we come to the kind of climatic. One of the climaxes of the performance, where the kind of character of the nymph wears a costume made out of panels of paper. I think that she activates in, again, this kind of, I don't know if it could be described as I think she's maybe impersonating the storm as it. I'll show you. I know I need to come to the end. I'll show you a small bit. you can see the shift. It stops, and then it cuts to, a very different dystopian landscape in a way. Suddenly it's quiet, and we're confronted with a contemporary landscape, something that hadn't really. There is some kind of. I don't know how. What makes a landscape contemporary when you can see the effects of, industrial use and kind of man-made alterations and changes. So we're suddenly at the Salton Sea in California, which is also particularly, in watching it now, pertinent in terms of the drought in California that is ongoing. Looking at the kind of footage of an abandoned kind of resort playground, something like that the camera kind of lingers over. And this is accompanied by a singer performing Woody Guthrie's Pastures of Plenty, and it really provides this kind of pause, this kind of space, what I think what Warburg calls a kind of a space for contemplation in the kind of trajectory of the whole of the performance, as coming straight after the kind of frenzy of the of the thunderstorm. But it doesn't really provide relief or release in any way, but it kind of is a where the space for reflection kind of embodies what Warburg's maybe hope for, modern culture in a way, but instead there is this kind of melancholic kind of perspective on a kind of dystopian landscape that has been kind of affected by mistreatment or a disconnection from from the natural world. So she sings the whole song, which is really kind of a big gap in how and how the soundtrack works as well. The live soundtrack, the piano played by composer Jason Moran is much more. Is interacting with is sort of guiding the narrative and action, and kind of providing transitions and kind of underlining things. And this really kind of stands completely by itself. I felt. So then the next scene kind of continues with the contemporary industrialized landscape by. Using footage of the wind farms, I assume also in on the way to the Salton Sea on the 10 in California, and this is then echoed by a kind of a dance using metal sticks, wheeling out of a kind of metal circle and letting that drop to the floor, and again it cuts to absolute silence. So there is this kind of this kind of punctuation of space, and a kind of bringing in of what this what this might mean, the kind of the relationship that the Hopi performing their snake dance have to the natural world versus the one that that we're experiencing now. So then. We're coming towards the end. Warburg. Warburg also reflects already then on this kind of disconnect between of modern man from the from the natural world in a kind of in the character that he calls Uncle Sam, that he photographed in San Francisco. He narrates it as he's Uncle Sam in a stovepipe hat, strolling in his pride past the neoclassical rotunda. Above his top hat runs an electric wire. In his copper serpent of Edison's, he has wrested lightning from nature. So he poses the question if science conquering a belief in the necessity of magic in order to kind of live in sync with the natural world really has produced such fantastic results. He doesn't say, let's go back to, to what would have been described as primitive practices at the time, but what can we learn from, placing these supposedly opposing poles next to each other and kind of letting them exist in their polarity, but thinking, but kind of allowing for, for that to kind of open up a new perspective, maybe. So here we come to the kind of very last scene in the, in the performance, where Jonas, back to the kind of persona of the nurse, accompanied by the stuffed coyote, crisscrosses the space almost as if to kind of reassert herself or mark it one last time. And I'm thinking about this of this kind of movement of the characters across the space as is something that Warburg identified in his, in the last years of his life as the kind of Denkraum, the space for reflection, as the defining space of modernity. So he understands this space for reflection as, what I already tried to describe, the ambivalence and simultaneity of primitive and rational dialectic poles as necessary conditions. So in his understanding, paganism and rationality never resolve their opposition. So his work on the library and the picture atlas is an ongoing investigation into these ambiguities that produce contemporary culture, modern culture. So he's very aware of the dangers of that, inherent in romanticizing and aestheticizing this study of mythology and this kind of, study of images as they kind of connect across time, and but making this, part of a process of an ongoing research and study is, introduces this element of self-criticism and self-reflexivity that, in his belief, would always keep this, this kind of danger of romanticizing in check. He died in 1933, but as a German Jew, he was very aware of the rise of anti-Semitism, of course, in combination with nationalistic ideology. So he actually anticipated that a simplistic romanticizing and aestheticizing of mythological imagery could lead to very dangerous extremes, such as the ideology of fascism. This is then later echoed in a lot of Walter Benjamin's writing, of course. So here we come to the, with that in mind, to the end of the performance, when the doors of Der Beacon are opened and daylight is let in. So the kind of, suddenly there is this shift to, a very kind of, the fact that the audience is in a real space, the performers are in a real space, and so they slowly leave and then return to the front to take their bow. And I think this end of the performance leaves the viewer, it somehow arrives at an ambiguous space, and I think with all of these with all of the kind of complex philosophical questions and historical questions that are kind of addressed in the in its unfolding over 80 minutes in the kind of narrative that it proposes, it completely engrosses the audience in this kind of dramatic, maybe even confusing experience that's almost like witnessing a kind of ritualistic event. But there is always this kind of analytical, melancholic, and critical voice, this kind of punctuations of space for reflection that runs throughout it as a kind of parallel experience. And I think in dialogue with Warburg's lecture, the very specific formal and metaphorical decisions that the artist Joan Jonas is making in relationship to the material that she's dealing with leaves us as an audience with in a space where we need to kind of form our own understanding of the narrative that she's presenting and the impact that might have for our own experience of life and art. And I like to leave it at this. I hope I didn't bore you. And I really would like to say that I'm sure I only made a small start, but I hope this gets performed somewhere again soon, so you get to have the actual experience. And thank you.